This episode of the Accounting Insiders podcast is brought to you in part by Xero. Xero is a powerful cloud accounting software that improves efficiencies across your practice. With all client data stored on a single unified ledger, you and your clients can easily access and collaborate on the same set of books. Xero's advisor tools and automation solutions reduce time-consuming manual tasks and put data entry on autopilot. Work faster and more efficiently than ever before with Xero. Visit xero.com/accounting insiders to learn more. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Accounting Insiders podcast. My name is Gary DeHart. I am the host of the Accounting Insiders podcast and the publisher of Insightful Accountant. And kind of the purpose of our podcast is to really reach out into the community and find into the accounting community and just have conversations with people who can who accounting professionals can hear from to help improve their business, whether it's improve their business internally, whether it's a conversation about an app that might be in the space or regulations. We don't really get too deep into regulations, but we do touch on that sometimes. I've got a series I'm working on right now that's about all the events or a lot of the events that are impacting the space or that'll be coming up after tax season. And my conversation today is with Mary Schmid. Mary, welcome. Thank you for being here.
My
And
pleasure.
yeah, so Mary is a speaker and author, and her latest book is called Make or Break Conversations: How Smart Financial Professionals
Mm.
Land New Clients and Keep Them for Life. So, so any smart financial professional needs to read that book because I think that should be all of our goals, right? Is to land clients and keep them for life because the hardest part is getting them on board, right? And the
Yes.
most expensive part of getting a new client. So, so again, thanks for taking some time and joining me today on the podcast. So, give us just a little bit of your background. How did you get to where you are?
Yes, thank you, Gary, and I'm happy to be here with you and your audience, and hopefully we'll give some value to take away a few nuggets that will make their conversations better. As an executive in healthcare, I thought I was pretty good at conversations. But some people were easy to get along with and talk to, and some people, I would just rather avoid. And why was that? Well, I asked my CEO, and he simply said, well, just keep talking to it. The group of people that I were working with were physicians. And he said, just keep talking to them. They'll get on board. They just don't like change. Well, that's good enough. And one day, my daughter and I were at a social function, and one of the moms there said to me, what do you do? My daughter, who was 13 at the time, piped up and said, she's the world's most expensive babysitter to doctors. Ooh, ouch, that stung.
Yeah,
And it stung because there was an element of truth to that. So
right.
why, as a research nerd, I began looking at why did some conversations go well and some just not go well. I used to think it was the other person. There's something wrong with them. I'm okay, right? I'm leading a good conversation, but my eyes were opened when I discovered what we call the science of conversation, because there's real science behind how we talk to people and the impact it has. So I went on a journey to study with a team of neuroscientists over a 3-year period of time and really learned the science, but then added to that, how can we apply that? So science is fine, but if you can't apply it, what's the point?
Yeah.
And so I started working with the financial firm, and together we got great results. And we wrote the book, Make or Break Conversations, looking at what it is that makes a good conversation. How do you lead that in real time? And the rest is history.
Right. Oh, that's great. And then there was one thing that I read in it that kind of struck me, and it really, when I read it, I was like, that explains a lot of what you see in conversations. And it was, I can't remember the numbers exactly, but it was basically your you can receive information that at this rate, but your brain is processing at this rate, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and I think we all find ourselves, especially like when I'm doing the podcast, I find myself doing this a lot where I ask a question and the person's answering it, but I'm already thinking about what the next question is.
Yeah.
And instead of stopping and listening, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And I think we'll get into that, right? The importance of stopping and listening, especially as it relates to a conversation with a client, because if you want to keep them for life, you have to understand them. So in the book, kind of it starts off with high trust conversations. So what is that? Can you kind of help define really what we're talking about there?
Yeah, I'd love to. So when you think about having a good conversation, what kinds of words come to your mind? Well, it was pleasant, it was good. We talked back and forth. But what the eye doesn't see, but the brain knows is that in a good conversation, there's something that happens that it makes it feel safe. And as a result, there's a chain reaction. And as a result of that, the brain senses that it's safe. It showers the brain with oxytocin, the social bonding chemical. Oxytocin opens up the prefrontal cortex, right? It's our reasoning, thoughtfulness, problem solving, innovation, creativity, and that's where trust lives. We cannot lead a high trust conversation when we don't have the prefrontal cortex open. And what happens many times is the opposite effect, and that is we're in a conversation, something is said that we may not agree with, or that it's different or new, and our brain automatically recognizes that, showers the brain with cortisol, the stress hormone,
Mm,
and it shuts us down. And so the lesson that we've learned from neuroscience is that a conversation has a predictable result. Either you will open up the prefrontal cortex and I feel open and safe to share with you information, or it closes it down and I'm in self-protection. And when I'm in self-protection, I don't disclose, I don't say anything, sort of tip of the iceberg conversation, because I'm guarding and protecting myself of saying something that you might not like, or that I don't want to disclose too much.
right. Yeah, and with accounting professionals, right? So they are, the trusted advisor, and
Yes,
they certainly they're in the seat to be the trusted advisor. But if they can't communicate well or have these types of conversations that allow, or I guess allow is the right word, the customer to open up,
right.
then there's a lot they're not learning. There's a lot they're missing that could be beneficial to the client, to their relationship, or to the client's, long-term, financial well-being, right?
Yeah, and there's a couple different kinds of conversations that we lead. A level one is what we call an informational conversation. Is I tell you the facts, I get the data, I give you information, and I'm done. And then I tell you what to do. We use level one information. I call it transactional kinds of conversations every day in our work world. What time is the meeting? Where do I go? Et cetera, et cetera. And that's all that we need. But when we're in a client relationship, we need to dig more than just the facts and the figures. So what it sounds like is, I get the facts, I get the figures. Okay, client, this is what I know. This is what you've answered the questions that I need answered. So this is what you do. So we go ahead and then with preliminary information, tell people what to do. And I say prematurely because we don't even know what's on their mind or what they're thinking or what they're wanting from us in terms of advice.
Right.
And so
Right.
there's no trust. It's like, Gary, how do you feel when someone tells you what to do?
Right. Depending on who it is.
Depending upon who it
Right.
is and the situation. But
Right.
most of us as human
Yeah.
beings like more
Sure.
autonomy and control than just being
Exactly.
told what to do.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm going to kind of step back and put my arms up, and right. So
Right,
absolutely.
right. And
And
then
so
there's
you
a second
touch.
kind of
Yeah.
conversation
Yeah.
that's called the positional
Okay.
persuasive conversation. And that's where we're smarter than the average bear. So we ask a bunch of questions and get a little rapport going. And we hear what the concerns are in the situation are. And then it happens, Gary. And then it happens in all of our expertise and wisdom. We heard what the problem is. We know what it is and we can solve it. So we go ahead and simply say, well, client, this is what you need to do because, and then out come the charts and the graphs and the software and all the data that we have, thinking that more data is going to convince them and persuade them to see things our way.
Mm,
And all it does is it creates distance because short into that conversation, the client sitting across from you is checked out. They're not here for your monologue. They're here for a conversation. So when you give all this information and you tell them what they need to do and you show them all the evidence and all the data, and then you say to them, well, do you have any questions? Well, of course they don't, for two
right.
reasons. One is you're the expert telling me what to do. It's a positional conversation. And very few of us will challenge someone who is an expert role in something that we're not in. Secondly, they don't know if they have any questions because they long tuned out to what you were saying.
Mm,
They didn't even hear a word you were saying. They're thinking about like How do I get out of this conversation? Where's the
Right.
door?
Right. Yeah. He had
Information,
something in his
information.
tooth, or yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's
That's
too much too soon all the time. So, when we researched this, most of us people, human beings, right, are experts at level 1 and level 2. In fact, 85% of our conversations are either telling or persuading people what it is that we think that they need to
mm,
do. So what's the antidote is to insert more of what we call a level 3. It's called a transformational conversation. And what that is about is really taking some time to discover what it is they want and share and discover, so that you know the situation, you know what's going on in their world, you have an idea of who they are as a whole person, not just the tax returns that they brought in. And I think this is particularly important for accountants, because if you're going to be serving as in an advisory role and a trusted partner, you've got to have people open up. You've got to know what's going on in their lives, not because it's a social engagement, because it gives you the information by which you can then help them.
mhm. Yeah,
And so a
and a
transfer,
judgment-free zone, right?
well, and that's the hard thing is, yes, because our brain is, when we're in conversation, we hear something that's a little different than what we know to be true. It automatically goes to judgment. When it goes to judgment, it shuts down the prefrontal cortex, right? We can't think, and all we can do is respond from what we know. And so we judge before we even know it. And so the antidote for judgment is, instead of when you notice that you're judging people, simply sit back a minute and simply say, what is it that they were trying to tell me? I don't know at all. Curiosity cures judgment, but it's a natural response that we all have when we're in conversations.
Yep.
Because remember, our brain is wired to protect us. And when there's something different than what we know or what's been said, it triggers us, floods us with cortisol. And so we have to recognize those situations so we can take a breath and reset.
Right. Okay. So that's three levels. Is there a fourth level of
No, those are
conversation?
the three
That's
levels of conversation. And
and
so if
and
you want to really start building that trust, we have to put more of a level 3 in there, so people feel safe,
mhm,
that they can open up and tell you what's really going on. It's hard sometimes because the facts and the numbers and what we do is we know that. We know it like the back of our hand. And so it's easy to default back to that rather than take the risk and ask some questions and open up the conversation so that people can tell us what it is that we need to know, not just what
mhm.
we want to know. I think there's the major difference.
Gotcha. And then so let's tie that into, I just want to make sure I say it right. So the kind of the seven principles of the conversation.
Yeah. So the book was written, and the way that I work with people is that I teach principle based, evidence based principles that stand the test of time, because no conversation is identical. So when you're in a conversation with someone, it's as unique as their fingerprint. But when you know principles, you can count on them and to apply them in your own voice, your own personality, and your own way. And that's, to me, the definition of authenticity. And people know that, and people feel that. And so the principles that I teach start with share the air. Principle number 1,
Mm,
you've got to share the air, invite them into the conversation. Instead of just starting with, here's a business that we need to cover, start with an emotional connection, something like as simple as this, Gary. I'm happy to see you. I'm looking forward to our time together, and drop it. That's it. What you want to do is drop these little tidbits that trigger their prefrontal cortex to open up. And then you start the conversation with, what's important to you today that we cover. I've got my agenda and I'll share that with you, but you go first. Again,
yeah.
inviting them to participate and go first. And then you compare notes and simply say, great, this is what we're going to cover today. So let's start with what's most important to you, and then we'll get to what it is that I want to talk about. This whole piece of co-creating the agenda. You've just taken this expert client, leveled the playing field. So now you're partners. No doubt that the CPA has a level of expertise that others don't have. No doubt about that. But you don't lead with that. You lead
Hmm.
with opening up the conversation, inviting them in. And once you do, their defenses drop. And so they're going to be more open.
I like it. Yeah, and just be personable, right? And act like it's, your child at home. My wife teaches third grade, and so there's a lot of, actually, when you were talking a minute ago, I was thinking about some of the conversations she's brought home just from her classroom, right?
Hmm.
Of third graders, of just teaching, and not saying that we as adults need to act like third graders, but in some cases we kind of do, right? Because they're, and I think you referenced in somewhere in your book, and that, ask a child, right? Because the child's going to tell you the truth. They're not jaded yet, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And-
Um, and approaching every conversation as an opportunity to learn about the other person. No doubt you've heard the same kind of challenges or problems that people come to you with, but you've not heard my story, you've not heard my situation. You don't know what's going on in my life. So if you approach the conversation that there's something for me, the CPA, to learn from my client, it makes it a lot easier.
yeah,
So you
and
can,
from the stickiness factor of the client, right? If I don't really like you, I might stay with you, but I'm not going to look forward to the conversations that I'm having with you if I'm your client. And and if you don't seem as if you really care about me, I'm probably not going to stay around
no.
as a client, right? So,
Right, because I want and it sort of seems like it's counterintuitive, but I want that personal touch. Yes, we've
mhm,
got business to do, and I'm not, and we will do the business, but I also want to know that you're there, that you care, and that you're going to help me problem solve through these difficult financial topics that I don't know much about.
right. And so number two, respect others' opinions, right?
Yes, and to me, the greatest way that we show respect is listening to connect to other people. And it's really hard for us because most of us are listening dropouts, which
Right.
means I speak at about 100 words a minute. You're listening at 400 words a minute and solving the problem, wondering what you're going to say next at 900 words a minute. And so before I even finish saying to you what I want to say, you've solved the problem, you've jumped ahead, and then you interject into the conversation and say, this is what we need to do. And you talk and you talk and you talk, because as more you talk about the things you know, you get a hit of dopamine to the brain, and the brain
Mm,
loves that. And so the more you talk, the more you talk. And then when it's all done, you say, "Ah, you would agree, right?"
right. And I'm like, I don't even know what you said. Uh,
Exactly. So listening to connect to the person, listen to connect to the person, to what their situation is, what their thoughts and or feelings are about that. And then the next step is, how can we work this together?
can
How
I,
can
can I,
we
before we go to, is that stretch thinking? Is that where you're going?
Yeah, and then the next thing comes stretch thinking, is looking
All
at
right.
the options. What's possible?
Well, before you get there, I had a question, and that was, are you seeing, because you've been doing this a while, are you seeing that kind of respecting others' opinion and that uh, being a part of the conversation, or are you seeing that that is more difficult for people? And again, just like with our, you know, we blame the phones, and well, there we go. We blame the phones, that our attention span has gotten super short. Are you finding that to be true? I mean, as you're
Yeah,
working with
and
people?
I do find that to be true. And what happens is our attention spans are really short. We're not listening, and then we simply say, well, that, and then we jump to the conclusion, or the assumption, I should say, that the other person just doesn't get it. And here
Mm,
we go again. Mrs. Jones is coming in. I have to tell her over and over and over again what's going on. She just doesn't get it. Well, she doesn't get it because of the way, because the impact of what you're saying is not registering in her brain. She's not processing that. So instead of blaming the other person, we need to look at ourselves and simply say, what do I need to do that when I hear an opinion that's different than mine, that I can just accept it and or challenge it, and beyond, and not react to it. So I have
mhm.
a different opinion. I would simply say, well, that might be true. Where did you learn that? How did you come to believe that? Who told you about that? You see, instead of judging it, we get curious.
There we go. Okay. And so stretch thinking, principle
Yeah.
number three.
Principle number 3 is all about, where do you want to go? Where do you want to go, and what are the possibilities to get there? We use that in everyday conversation to, when we're working with clients, and simply saying, so what are the options? What do you see as an option? What do I see as an option? Rather
Mhm.
than just simply saying it is what it is, kind of stretch their imagination and stretch their thinking, which triggers a prefrontal cortex to come up. And you will hear clients say, well, I never thought about it like that. Or, oh, okay. What if I did this instead? So that's important because it helps us look at the options to trigger the brain to open up.
Yeah, and I imagine two comments on that. One for me, I always like to have conversations where it's, what's your best outcome, right?
Yeah.
What is the perfect outcome for you if nothing else mattered? What's the perfect outcome for you? And especially if it's like we were recently, my brother and I were talking to my parents just about kind of next steps, right? What do you do
Mhm,
with the house or whatever? Mom, what's your perfect outcome?
mhm,
Dad, what's your perfect outcome? And
mhm.
if they're not the same, well, we're going to have to figure out how to get to almost perfect outcomes for both of them, right? Or nobody's happy. Um,
It's a great example, Gary. That's a
so,
great example.
so that's one thing that came to mind, and I didn't write it down. The second thing I forgot, so we'll move on to
Yeah.
discover. Oh, I know what it was. It was about our tendency to think short term versus long term, right? So when you do your stretch thinking, I'm not thinking about, you know, what's possible in a week, thinking about what's possible in 10 years, especially from an accounting perspective or a
Mhm.
financial planning perspective, 20 years, 30 years down the road. And if I can think long term, it changes my decisions short term, right?
Right. And when we have conversations that open up the brain, it's easier for that to happen because we
Yeah.
have the short term immediate problem or situation that we need to resolve. So once that's resolved, how does that connect to what it is that we want down the road long term?
Yeah.
And
And
so the fourth principle of discover comes in when we say, okay, so here is, where we're headed. This is the outcome that we're looking for. What are options to get there? So rather than me telling you, here's our three options, it's first asking you, what does that look like? My favorite question of all, what does that look like? And people will respond to that question because it's an easy question to answer,
mhm.
and it opens up their brain. So what does
and
that look like for you? And then people will begin simply saying, well, I never thought about that. Give me a minute. Let me think about, you know, a few years down the road. And all of a sudden the light bulb goes on and they will tell you exactly what that looks like for them. Because, as we get a hit of dopamine talking about our favorite subject, so does our client.
you have any kind of little hints that, because as you were saying that again, thinking and at speeds, my first thought was, well, I imagine the initial response is, gosh, I don't know, and you said that, and then do you have any tips that can help an advisor kind of draw this out of their client, try to help them to think and discover?
Yeah, your first answer might be, I don't know, because you're asking, it's an easy question, but it's not one that they've thought about before. So my first tip is to give some space to the conversation. Just pause, let them sit with it. Well, gosh, I don't know. My second thing is, well, let's just think about what if you did know? What might that look like? Pause and let their brain see. The thing is, when you ask a question about them and it's an open ended question like that, their brain goes to work and has to answer it. Our brain hates incompleteness and it has to answer the question. So give them a little time to process that. And I always say, I like questions for which you don't have the answer. Many times we ask questions that are leading questions. You would agree, right? This is what we need to do, right? This is a okay, and that may have its place. But when we ask questions that we don't have the answer for, it's like, well, what would that be like for you? What would you imagine that to be? It opens up the door.
Mhm.
Their brain starts working. Give them some time to let their brain process that question, and you will get an answer. So it's all about taking it and deepening it and asking questions and follow-up questions. And so what would that look like? And what would that mean for you? Okay, what else? You see how I leave it so
Yep.
open-ended, and it's not like bing bang boo. It's not an it's not an interrogation. It's a question Pause, let them answer, and then follow up with what it is that they just told you. People will say, well, what are the 20 best questions? There aren't any. The best question is a question you ask that's open-ended and related to what they just said,
Right.
because
Yeah.
that will show them what? That you listen, that you're with them, that you're present, and that you're their partner. You want to help them solve the challenge that's in front of them.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you want them to be with you in this. You're not telling. You're not the expert
Yeah.
telling
Because
people what
ultimately, I
to.
mean, you want them to really come to that conclusion with your guidance, right? It's not because that way they're going to buy into it, right?
And
And
that's
if it's
absolutely the key. In these kinds of conversations, you guide the conversations. And when people start hearing themselves verbalize, sometimes for the first time ever, what they're thinking, they get that aha moment and they
right.
come to an idea themselves. And an idea that we come to ourselves is much better than being told what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. My wife can tell me we need to paint the house, 100 times, but until she points out and helps me understand why we need to paint the house, it doesn't sit as well, right? Yeah. Till
Right,
I buy in
right.
on it. Right.
Well, and I
So
think you brought up an important point is that when we have our ideas that we're sharing with our clients and next principle exploring, we're exploring more.
mhm,
There's a magical word that I encourage people to use, and that's because we're exploring what our options are. We're exploring where we can go. This is important because finish the sentence, a quick explanation why. This is important because it will help you to XYZ. Keep it short, keep it brief, keep it concise. What you've just done is connected what they're thinking to what your action is or what you want and to
mhm,
guide them to do. And when people know why we're asking them to do something, they're much more likely to paint the house.
right. Yep. Exactly. So then I move on to speak up. So what does that mean? Is that me speaking up as the advisor, or is it me encouraging the client to speak up, or both?
You, the advisor, need to encourage the client to speak up. As I
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, when we are talking to people as if we're pontificating from up on high and telling them what to do, people shut down and they
Yep.
will not speak up. They won't speak up because they're afraid that you will make fun of them or that you don't understand them. They don't want to take the risk and actually look foolish in front of you, the expert. So, what we need to do is set the stage in the very beginning of every conversation that this is a conversation between the two of us, and whatever ideas you have, whatever questions you have, I want to hear them.
Yep. So
And
so putting truth to the statement that many people say, there are no dumb questions, right? But actually meaning that there are
yeah,
no dumb questions, and you being very open about that, like, hey, this isn't what you do daily, right? So I get it if you don't understand X, Y,
yeah,
or Z.
yeah,
Makes sense. Why would
exactly.
you understand it? You're busy making bread,
Yeah,
as a
so
baker.
let me
Yeah.
give you a brief explanation because. And
Yep.
it's there it is. And when people have that, when you've set the stage for that conversation and actually the relationship where I can ask you anything anytime, you need to be careful that you don't skip over dumb questions,
Yep. Yep.
because
Okay. And then we move on to, yeah, I'm sorry, go
it's
ahead.
easy for us to say, oh, well, that doesn't matter. I know this. Well, you the expert might know that, but I don't.
Right.
So be thoughtful, not skipping over or avoiding tough questions or difficult questions or dumb questions. You simply say, I recommend people saying, oh, well, thank you for asking that question. I haven't thought about that before. And here's what I think. But what do you think is more important?
Hmm.
How does this work for you?
Okay, great. And then number 7, success together.
Oh, this is my favorite one. And
Yeah.
it can be established early on in your relationship. And that is working together. What does that look like for both of us? It's sort of this whole idea of setting expectations early, but you do it together. So what does success look like for you? As we're working together, what would you like to see happen? What have been your experiences with people like me, with experts like me? And then it's time for you to share your own expectations, which is I would really like to partner with you so that we can accomplish the things that are important to you. As simple as that. But looking at how do we, it's not just my success as an individual or my success as a firm, but it's our success. You see, once again, we're going from me to we.
Yep.
So what does it look like for us to create this relationship or this working together, and how will that operate? And then you can get into and the whole piece about, asking questions. When you have questions, you can call me. This is how you get a hold of me, but I'm here for you. And so not just saying the words, but then showing through your actions that you're there to answer questions, to be available, and to help
Right.
them.
Yep. And ultimately, again, that's what it's about. I mean, it is a, I guess a customer, it's a customer client relationship, but
Mhm.
the point and kind of the key of the book is to make those relationships sticky, to make them a customer for life. And if you're, an accounting firm, bookkeeping firm, and you're looking at the whatever your end goal is for your business, right? If it's to sell at some point, you want sticky clients. You want
Yes.
people coming back to you year after year. You don't want to have to keep reselling 50% of your business and bringing on new clients all the time. You want sticky, 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 and building that relationship that we've been talking about is key to that. Obviously, I mean, you have to do good work is I think the given, but I'm going to, if I'm your client, I'm going to assume you're going to do good work until you do
Mhm.
differently. But I'm going to stay around if I like you and if I feel like you respect me and if I feel like, you're listening in our conversations. If I have to tell you the same thing 3 times, clearly you're not listening to me.
Mhm.
And I've got, I've got 86,000 other, you know, accounting pros that I can go find who will, some of whom will listen to me.
Yeah.
So,
And the
so
people that lead these kinds of conversations don't want just a transaction. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I've met some CPAs who just simply want a transaction. Send me your forms and I'll do your tax work. Okay,
yeah,
that's their choice and their business model. But other CPAs want a business model where they really do have these client relationships, might even do some business advisory. And this is even critical because when people feel that you care about them and that you are working on their behalf and that they can trust you, there's really some, I call it magical things that happen, but they'll do what you ask them to do.
right.
So you need to do okay, you need to do this client because, okay, they will stay with you. It's
Yep.
all too true. It's rare to find someone that will really lead these kinds of conversations that are personal and that I look forward to. And the third thing is that they will tell other people about you because it
Right.
is such a beautiful experience that it comes up at a coffee or a dinner with friends. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's tax time. And guess what? I can hardly wait to talk to my CPA. He or she is the best in the world. What makes them the
Right.
best? Well, they talk to me and I understand things. And, you know, we just get along well.
Right. Yeah. Somebody I want to be around.
Yeah, you want to do
So,
business with me because of how I lead my conversations, because it's the conversations that build the relationships that lead to long-term loyalty and clients for a long time.
perfect. Yep. All right. Well, I'm going to start pushing us towards the close. So you wrote a book. Is this your only book or do you have multiple books?
This is the only one so
This
far.
is the premier book. All right. And so how do you make a living? And I'm reason and this is, kind of getting into how do people get in touch with you and et cetera. So how do you make a living?
Three different ways.
Okay.
So I first am a speaker. So I speak at conferences and events talking about exactly what we've talked about here, and that's the
Okay.
science of conversations and how they how different professions can use them. I consult with firms who may want to say, well, let's do an engagement about talking about this to my firm, and that's fine. I'll do consulting or I'll do a longer term program where I come in and basically embed myself into your culture and work with the whole team from leadership all the way to the front desk person to really look at how do we lead a different kind of conversation. Because in a firm, it all works together. And
Right.
so that's the three ways that I make a living and make money and really enjoy and love what I'm doing, because this is the deal. People get, when people do the work, they get the results. They have the principles embedded in their brain about how to lead these conversations that beget trust. And then they are free to really focus and be present when when they're in conversations with their clients or their colleagues or their family.
Right. Yep.
It
Absolutely.
basically rewires your brain in terms of how you relate to people, period.
Yeah. And that's key, right? Relationships are ultimately what it's all about.
Exactly.
And so how do people find you? How do they get in touch with you?
So I have a special gift for your audience,
All
and they can
right,
get,
bring it.
yeah, it's maryschmid.com/accounting insiders/. So I
Okay.
have a special report that's called High Trust Conversations Are Your Competitive Advantage. And so if they go to that landing page, they can certainly download it free. There's a copy of my book that's there. And if they want to contact me, they can do that also. But I
Okay.
always believe in giving first. And if people are interested, they'll take the next step. I'm also on LinkedIn. So there's a couple
Okay.
different ways.
And it's give that URL one more time
So
just to
it's
make sure we
Mary
pick it up.
Schmidt, MarySchmid.com
Okay.
/ accounting insiders, name of your podcast,
Yep.
/
Great. All right. We'll have
Yeah,
that in the show notes as well. And
great.
I think we also will put it into the bottom of the video as well. So we'll certainly put
Perfect.
it in there. And then are you scheduled to speak at any accounting specific conferences?
I am not. I just got
Okay.
back from one in California last week. And again,
Okay.
speaking to, it was a group of accounting professionals, financial reps, financial planners, estate attorneys. It was a multidisciplinary group.
Okay. Well, great. All
Yeah,
right. Well,
because
maybe
this
we'll see you
applies
out on
to
the
what?
I was gonna say maybe we'll see you out on the road somewhere
That would be
at some events.
delightful. That would be delightful, Gary.
Absolutely. Well, Mary, it was a great conversations. And again, the name of the book, Make or Break Conversations: How Smart Financial Professionals Land New Clients and Keep Them for Life. So if you like what we talked about, go to maryschmid.com/accounting insiders, or go to maryschmid.com, and then you can download the reports you talked about with the slash accounting insiders slash, right? And then
Terrific.
great. Mary, thank you so
Yes.
much. I enjoyed the conversation, and we will talk to you very soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, bye bye.